Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Joan, and I am a Lower Manhattan resident. Just to give you a little sense of where I lived, I moved into this community in 1998, and the community is called Battery Park City. And in fact, I lived literally one block from the World Trade Center. In fact, when I looked out of my living room and bedroom windows, I had a full view of the South Tower from my windows. I remember getting up on the morning of 9/11, a beautiful day, crystal clear blue sky, and it was kind of early. And that week, I was getting ready to go on vacation. And so I decided that I would actually get ready for work, go to work early that day, and get more done so that I could be prepared to actually go on vacation. Now, work for me was in Jersey City on the other side of the Hudson River. And so when I left my apartment that morning and I locked my apartment door, it was about 7:30 a.m. My husband was still sound asleep because he works down here. And so he walks to work. And so when I locked my apartment door and I left, I had absolutely no idea what was about to happen. I had no idea that I would never go back to live in that apartment again, to sleep in that bed again. I just thought it was going to be another day. I walked through the World Financial Center right next to the block where I live. I crossed over a footbridge called the North Bridge to get over to the World Trade Center. And I went down into the lower level of the World Trade Center to board a train, the Port Authority Trans-Hudson Line, the PATH train. And I took that PATH train because it was the vessel that got me over to Jersey City. And I got to my office that morning. It was about 8:15 a.m., very short commute, by the way. And when I got to my office, I noticed there were a lot of people in that day. It was a Tuesday morning. It was a sales office. A lot of people were getting ready to go out on their sales calls. I got my coffee, did my doodling, and then I went into a conference room to start my workday. And that conference room, by the way, faced Lower Manhattan. My office was right on the Hudson River. And so I could see those two towers in my line of sight as clear as day. 8:46 a.m., I heard a loud sound. I looked up into the window and I saw a commercial jet. The plane was flying very low, very high speed. In fact, what was amazing to me was that I could actually hear those engines roaring. And I watched as American Airlines Flight 11 approached the North Tower. I took note that there was no attempt to divert the tower. I watched as the airplane just got swallowed up into the tower. I remember the screams from my colleagues who had seen what I just saw. I remember looking up and seeing that gaping hole in the tower and black smoke just pouring out. I called my husband. He had no idea what had happened. In fact, he told me that it was quiet down here, very quiet that morning. When he ran to the window and looked up and saw what had happened, I said to him, I think we've been attacked. I had no insider information. All I had was what I saw. And what I saw was telling me that this was an attack. Because honestly, if you knew Lower Manhattan and you knew the World Trade Center, you also knew that if you were a pilot, you couldn't miss these towers. They defined our skyline. They were taller than everything down here. And so I was already thinking it was an attack. I didn't have to think much longer, by the way, because at 9:02 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 flew right over my building in Jersey City. We heard it before we saw it. It flew down towards the Statue of Liberty, made a sharp turn over the statue, and at 9:03 a.m., it struck the South Tower. And now my greatest fear was validated. We were under attack. I called my husband, and all I said to him was 2 words: get out. Go south, go west, do whatever you have to do to get off the island. And then from that conversation, I lost track of him. The only thing I did know is he told me that when United Airlines Flight 175 struck the South Tower, he actually felt it. The area, it was like an earthquake. Everything here shook. There were things falling everywhere. And I just remember saying to him over and over again, please get out. Please leave. Go. My husband did evacuate. He evacuated, and he did make it over to Jersey City on a police tugboat. His story is very different than mine. His story is, in fact, part of the boat lift story. And I encourage you to take some time to go on YouTube and listen to the boat lift. It is an incredible story of survival by over 500,000 people who made it off the island of Manhattan that day because of the private boaters and the ferries and our officials here on boats who made it possible for people to safely get off the island. I'll fast forward and tell you that my husband and I were not able to get home. In fact, it wasn't until 6 days later that we actually were able to make it back to Lower Manhattan to check on the damage of my apartment. In those 6 days, I had a friend, her name was Andy, who took me and my husband into her home and gave us a place to live. And I will never, never forget what Andy did for us. And when I made it back to my apartment on the following Monday, and I walked up the stairs in the pitch black, there were no lights down here. There were no services down here. And when I walked up to my apartment and I opened up my apartment door, I honestly have to tell you, my second 9/11 happened. All of my windows were blown in. Everything I owned was covered with about 1.5 inches of dust. The air quality was so bad that you could cut the air with a knife. And I remember walking up to my living room window, closing my eyes, hoping that I was going to open up my eyes and it would all be gone, that it would all be normal. But when I opened my eyes, what I saw was complete devastation, twisted steel, ash and debris everywhere. And I knew my life would never be the same. And it has never been the same. But that is the crux of my 9/11 story. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share it with you. And I'm going to hand this back to Kwaku.
All right, Guy.
So, good day. My name is Guy. I'm an emergency medical technician. I'm a 9/11 first responder. On September 11th of 2001, I was on my way to my day job, which is in a suburb out in Long Island. I was working EMS part-time as a supervisor for a private ambulance company, but my full-time job was with an agency out in Long Island because people who work in EMS don't make a lot of money. So most of us work more than one job. It was a beautiful morning. I was driving down the highway. I noticed that traffic into Long Island was heavier than usual, but I wasn't listening to my radio. I had my own music on, so I didn't know what was going on. When I got to my office, I saw clusters of my coworkers around each other's desks listening to the radio. Because this is 2001, it was before smartphones and Facebook and all those things that we take for granted right now. So this is how we got our information. And I asked what was going on, and they said that a plane had crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center. Initially, I had thought that perhaps it was a small plane. Someone's learning how to fly. Somebody got sick while flying a small plane. The last thing I thought was that it was a passenger jet. But then, about 20 minutes later, I heard about the second plane hitting the second tower, and I knew immediately that we were under some type of attack. As an emergency medical technician, my first inclination is they're going to need help down there. I need to get down there, but I didn't want to just leave my office and go down there. I wanted to be part of an organized effort, so I started to call my ambulance company. But all the lines were busy. We had 6 different extensions. I called each of those extensions, and the line was busy every time I called, and I kept calling over and over and over again. In my office, one of my coworkers was starting to get very distraught because her boyfriend worked on one of the towers, and she was trying to reach him, and she couldn't reach him. So she was starting to cry, and people were trying to comfort her, and it just got me more anxious. And I kept calling my ambulance company, and I couldn't get through. We heard about the plane that hit the Pentagon, and it made me even more anxious. I'm still trying to call my ambulance company. I still can't get through. In my office there, some of my computers went down, some of the phones went down. I was getting frustrated with not being able to make contact, and I walked out to the parking lot. I noticed that the building next to our building, which was Department of Immigration and Naturalization, was starting to evacuate. So I came back inside and told my human resources director they were evacuating the building next door. And he said, "Shh, don't tell anybody anything. We're still trying to figure out what we're going to do," which got me aggravated. And I went back to my desk and I grabbed my phone and I called my ambulance company and I got through. I said, "Do you need me?" They said, "We need everybody." I said, "I'm on my way." I hung up the phone. I stood up in the office and I announced, "They're evacuating the building next door. I'm on my way down there. You're on your own," and I'm out. And I left. Subsequently, they did let the employees leave early, but they made them make up the time later. So I start my trek back into New York City from Long Island. Anyone familiar with New York traffic knows how congested it can be. But at this point, we knew we were under attack. The police had closed off all the bridges, the tunnels, and the highways leading into Manhattan, except for emergency vehicles and first responders. So for the first time in my life, I got on that highway and there were no other cars on the highway except mine. I drove as fast as I could back into Brooklyn where I resided, ran up the stairs to my apartment, changed into my uniform, grabbed my equipment, and I drove to my ambulance base. When I got there, it was a beehive of activity. We had already had some ambulances on the scene when the towers had collapsed. There was a big whiteboard with 10 numbers on it. Those 10 numbers were 10 ambulances just for my ambulance company that were on scene when the towers collapsed and were now missing. We had no contact with the individuals in that ambulance, in those ambulances. Some of our ambulances were being sent to relocate people who had come into the emergency rooms in the immediate area for minor injuries or illnesses that had nothing to do with the attacks. And they were moving them to hospitals farther away so there'd be more room for trauma patients from the attacks. They didn't know at that time there weren't going to be many more after the first couple of waves. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be on scene. Since I was a supervisor and had experience, my operations manager ensured that I was going down there. He gave me a partner, gave me an ambulance, and 15 extra tanks of oxygen. He deployed me to Beth Israel Hospital in downtown Manhattan on 15th Street and 2nd Avenue. The reason why they sent me there instead of directly to the site was because of this thing called the Tokyo Roll. In 95 and 96, there was a terror attack in Tokyo, Japan, where sarin gas was released. And as the first responders came there, they were overcome by the gas. And then when the next wave came in, they were also overcome by the gas. So in response to that, they crafted this rule so that if ever you had a mass casualty incident, which the terror attacks would count as, and you had a catastrophic situation occur, as what happened when the towers collapsed, that they would wait until things settled enough so before they sent a second wave in. So I was going to be part of that second wave of rescuers. So I'm driving through Brooklyn at breakneck speed. They had adjusted traffic so that emergency vehicles can just go straight into the city. As I'm approaching the Brooklyn Bridge to cross into Manhattan, I can see all the smoke in the air and people coming across the bridge covered with dust and debris. I get stopped by a police officer at the foot of the bridge who has 5 firefighters with him. And he says, listen, these guys are getting ready to walk across the bridge. Is it possible you can take them across? So, of course, I said yes. Now, my ambulance is a smaller ambulance, like a van type. It wasn't a large one, like the fire department in New York has. But I was able to jam those 5 firefighters, the equipment in the back of my ambulance, and guide them across the bridge. I got across the bridge, and I let them out, but I looked around, and I can no longer see the towers anymore. Where they used to be, I saw just plumes of smoke. I saw twisted metal. I saw cars that were on fire, debris all over the place. I proceeded to Beth Israel Hospital where we had staged that. As a supervisor, all the supervisors from the various agencies and companies were being gathered together and given assignments. They assigned 5 ambulances to me, told me where we were going to deploy at. And while this is happening, some of my coworkers who were on site when the towers collapsed are being brought back to Beth Israel Hospital. And we see them all covered with debris. The people that were brought back were what we call walking wounded. So they had either minor injuries or had no visible injuries, but they were all covered with the dust and debris. Some were literally pulling rubble out of their pockets because they had been pulled out of the debris. And they're starting to tell us their stories. In the midst of this, we're hugging and we're kissing them because we're glad that they're alive. But we also found out that one of my coworkers did not make it. She was a 24-year-old young lady with an 8-year-old son. She was a single mom. In fact, her funeral, her name was Joan M, and her funeral was the first of all the first responder funerals. So with all this in mind, finally it's my turn to lead my people down. We proceeded down FDR Drive, and we ended up at Eastern Avenue and Liberty, which was in Battery Park City, diagonally across from the World Trade Center site, and we start to set up. While we're setting up there, I see in the middle of the rubble, there's a U.S. Army soldier. She's a staff sergeant. She's wearing a Class B uniform, so she's got on her ribbons and a shirt and a beret, but she's wearing a surgical mask and latex gloves, and she's just sitting in this plastic chair in the middle of the rubble with her hands folded in her lap and her knees pressed together. And I asked her if she was all right, and she told me she was a U.S. Army recruiter and that she was on her way into the towers because her recruitment center was there. And as she was doing that, she saw the plane hit the building. She also said that she was an emergency medical technician. So when they set up the triage area, she went in there to serve. And while she was doing triage, the building started to collapse. And she said she ran for her life. And then she got very quiet. And she said, I'm thinking about the people I left behind when I ran out of the building. And I realized that she was feeling guilty for having saved her own life. I didn't want to leave her by herself. So I said to her, look, you obviously have more experience than the people I'm working with here. Why don't you come with us and help us out? I'm sure that we could benefit from your knowledge and expertise. And I brought her with us, and she stayed working with us until about midnight that night when we got relieved. Much of what we did was dealing with other first responders who were going into rubble, firefighters and police officers, mostly firefighters, looking for survivors, looking for their comrades. Cleaning debris out of their eyes. I had one firefighter say to me, he wanted me to wash his eyes out with sterile water. And I said, okay, have a seat over here. He says, no, I'm not sitting down. Yeah. If I sit down, you're gonna try to make me lay down. If you lay down, you're gonna try to take me out of here. I'm not going anywhere. So I'm gonna stay in here and you do what you need to do. And so that's what I did. At some point it was about 5:25 in the afternoon, I saw a group of firefighters walking in my direction, very casually. And one of them turned to me and says, now you should probably move this. This building's getting ready to go. And so I looked at my staff and I said, okay, come on, let's move our equipment about a half a block over to the east. So this building's getting ready to go. And I actually had somebody question it. So, well, they said we should be safe here. And I pointed to the crushed fire trucks and the burning police vehicles and the overturned ambulances. And I said, they told them they were going to be safe there too. Why are you even asking me questions? And literally minutes after that, Building 7, World Trade Center collapsed. And all that dust and debris went back up into the air and all over us. That day, we didn't really rescue anyone. We helped get some people out of Battery Park City because as Joan brought out, the power had gone down. There was an elderly woman trapped on the 33rd floor of one of the buildings, so we had to walk up the stairs and carry her down in the dark. Like I said, we dealt with other responders going into rubble and treating them. But other than that, we really didn't get any patience to serve. And it was frustrating for us because that's what we were there for. And we got there after the second wave, and there really wasn't any people after that. The next day I went back to my day job, but I sat there for like 10 minutes and I realized I couldn't stay there. So I left and came back to my ambulance company again and ended up coming down for the second day. Recovering some of our vehicles, and we had a critical incident stress debriefing after that, where I heard even more of the stories of my coworkers about what they had experienced down there. But it's an experience I'll never forget. And there's so many details that I continue to remember about it. And they stay as poignant to me today as they were on that day.
Thank you, Guy. Mark?
Hi, I'm Mark Demore, and like Joan, I'm a resident down here. And unlike Joan, I'm going to be looking from a different angle. She was looking from Jersey City, looking east. I live approximately 5 blocks away north of the tower. My office is 4 blocks away. So my perspective is looking south. But very much, it's the same perspective that I think Joan talked about. On that day, and you know, I'll just reiterate what Joan said. It was a gorgeous day. I think we all remember that. I think we woke up because the day before was miserable. It was hot. It was humid. It was New York City ugly. But that day it was cool. It was low humidity, crystal clear skies. It was a brilliant day visually. My connection and what about the neighborhood, I need to go back to 1988 and then maybe a little earlier. When I first moved to the city, you know, the towers were there. They had been up for a while in 76 when I moved in. You know, they were just part of New York. In 1988, I moved down to Tribeca, a few blocks away. And the towers were there. They had a presence. But the presence they had was not that we were drawn there. The presence there were that they were a pin drop in the map of my life, in the map of Donna, my wife's life. We would say, oh, we live down by the World Trade Center. If I was on a trip out to New Jersey with clients and coming back, I'd point to the towers and say, that's where my house is. That's where the office is. So they became this sort of magnet of home. At the same time, there was a little community building up around them. There was the mall downstairs, and Donna and I would go down there. We'd walk the dogs down there. There was a Krispy Kreme there, and we would go there, get a donut and coffee and toast, have a donut toast, bump our donuts together. So it took on a presence, but not a centerpiece as much as a marker, a life marker, kind of a marker of home. So that day I got up, I made coffee, walked the dogs. Donna was going to head out to go to her job uptown, and I was going to walk a block south and go to my office. I usually get in 8 o'clock, unlock the elevator. Now, the building I live in, or the building I work in, oh, let me go back to where I live. At night, in the bedroom, I would fall asleep and I would see the North Tower from my window. I would see it twinkling, you know, in the fog and the light, you know, the lights were there. It was like, I'm home, I'm going to sleep. So that day I get to my office and it's a 5-story, it used to be a walk-up. They have an elevator. It's an old, way pre-war, turn of the century building, brick, put an elevator in. So I get in 8 o'clock, put coffee on for my staff, for my employees. You know, we're a small business, and the office runs north to south. It's about 900 square feet. It's called a railroad flat. In New York City, a railroad flat is this long corridor. So on the south side, you could see the towers. On the north side, you'd see Chambers Street. Sat down at my desk, started working. An employee came in. He came in. We yapped a little bit, which, it's morning. I want to do my work. So I'm at the keyboard. I'm typing. And at 8:45, I hear this jet engine. I hear this jet engine. I have been on the tarmac in Central America getting on jets. You board from the tarmac. I have never heard something so loud. And it kept getting louder and louder and louder. Suddenly, it was right on top. The building shook. We're on the top floor. I instinctively, I have no clue why, ducked my head down on my keyboard. 3 seconds later, approximately, I heard this explosion. Since it echoed off the buildings on the north side, I ran to the north window to look out and said, huh? Then I ran to the south windows and looked. In the north tower, approximately, I think the 92nd floor, if you guys can correct me accurately, was engulfed in smoke and flames. Black smoke, as Joan described, was billowing up, debris. And what I later discovered were people were falling from the building. I watched it. And I stood there. Now, my employees, the two that were there, said my language was very salty at the time. I just could not believe what I was seeing. And I stood there watching this, watching these flames, watching this all go on. I'm watching 9/11 or 9/8, whatever the time was. Now, I couldn't see it because the way the buildings were focused, here was the North Tower, and the South was hidden, so I couldn't see around it. Suddenly, there were these flames that leapt out of the South Tower, and it was like something out of Game of Thrones, the dragon. These flames leapt up. Now, the angle wasn't good. I felt they licked the other building. That time, I grabbed my employee. I said, let's get out of here. Headed back to my house. Put the TV on. We're watching. We're beginning to get, some of the news of what was going on. Me, in all my genius, I grabbed my binoculars. I went back to my office and I started watching up close. And that's when I realized that debris were people. And I put my binoculars down because that is the most personal thing a person is doing. I could not be a witness with them. When my wife passed away, it was time when I was, this was later from cancer. Being with somebody at that moment, I couldn't be personally with them. And following that, it took me a long time to get over my survivor's guilt. So I'm watching, and I suddenly see the South Tower start to come down. I see it pancaking by this time. And this white debris comes up, this asbestos. One of the things that doing tours you learn is there were approximately 45,000 windows, glass windows in both the towers. Only one window survived intact. A lot of that debris that was coming up was ground glass. So that is part of some of the long-term results a lot of us are suffering from, and many are suffering from. So the South Tower went down. I beat a path back, grabbed my camera, and went out. I started walking toward the North Tower. And as I'm looking at the North Tower, I was on West Broadway, which is a direct line. The North Tower starts to come down, and it starts to pancake exactly the same way. And it's going in slow motion, you think. The reality is it came down in what, 10, 11 seconds? You all can chime in later on that. I beat a path back to the apartment. I made a turn. Up behind me was all this debris blowing up. Came all the way up these canyon walls. So I'm in the house. I let it settle down. I go back out. There's dust over everything. The dust on the street. As you work further down, the dust goes from, on my block, about 5-6 inches deep, all the way down to foot deep. A couple things that are noteworthy as far as the memories are concerned were, after the North Tower came down, it was absolutely silent. No planes, no sirens, nothing. And you would see these people walking north as I described, they were covered in debris. They looked like kabuki actors in all white. And they looked like the Walking Dead. I mean, they were just, it was terrible to see. I got home, sent my employees, they headed up to Penn Station or across the Brooklyn Bridge. They headed out, I was there. Now, Donna had left to go to her job. And I was worried about it because you couldn't come down into Tribeca. It was blocked off. About 3:30, 4 o'clock, the door springs open. Donna's there. Now, Donna's a creative director. She's an artist. Black is her color. She had on a camouflage bandana and 2 little American flags. She taped the American flags to the door. I said, why the camo bandana? And how did you get across Canal Street? She said, we're at war. That was the first time I heard that on the news. Donna, my wife, who, was not a news junkie, got it immediately. And I said, well, how'd you get across it? And she said, I ducked under the barricades and I ran like hell. She said, I guess nobody wanted to chase me. I was not leaving our home. This is our home. This is our community. We're needed here. So she's petting the dogs and she looks up at me and she says, is Krispy Kreme gone? And I said, what, are you out of your mind? You want a donut? And she looked at me and she said, no, stupid. I'm thinking all those donuts became halos for everybody who died. I'm worried about those who died. The power went out. That night we stayed. We found a hotel in the area, so we didn't have to leave the area at all. And one of the things I remember is, as Joan said, what everybody did. Suddenly the world was at her door. In the mornings, the streets were cleaned the next day. I don't know how New York City did it. 3 days, the power was back on. And every morning there were drops of water, toiletries, socks, t-shirts. The community of 9/11, that of the towers, was gone. But a new community sprang up, and that is what I come away with. It's a community of those of us you're listening to. It's a community of you who are taking the time to hear our stories. We are another community. There's a memorial there. We give tours, but the community is really this dispersed group. Those of us who were there, those first responders, those recovery workers, those who lost somebody, and those in the neighborhood. So my memory is the day and its horror, but the fact that's been replaced by a community like those of you watching, and those of you who will carry our memory beyond this 20 years. And I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you, Kweku.
Thank you, Mark. Andy?
Hello, everybody. My name is Andy Trebanko. I'm a retired captain from the New York City Fire Department. And I retired from the New York City Fire Department in 1997, and I became a school teacher. so I was a school teacher for about 4 years. And what had happened was I went to a party and I met a bunch of firefighters that I knew. And they said, Andy, you know, after the 93 bombing, the city of New York insisted that the World Trade Center comply with the New York City Fire Code. Now, New York City Fire Code and Building Code, the World Trade Center complex did not have to comply with this because it was a separate entity. It was the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. So what happened was I wasn't making that much money as a parochial school teacher. So I decided to become a deputy fire safety director at the World Trade Center. So it was a bunch of retired firefighters that I knew working at the World Trade Center. So the new fire safety director, his name was Jimmy Corrigan. He was the captain of Ladder 10, which was in Lower Manhattan across the street from the World Trade Center. And he said, I was working 4 midnight shifts, 3 nights a week. And Jimmy said, listen, Andy, just work an additional week. I'll switch you to days because it's better to work days. So what had happened was this was on 4/10 of 2001, and I was off for the 11th. So I went home and I was going kayaking with a friend of mine. I live in Staten Island, New York, which is one of the 5 boroughs, and it's connected to Brooklyn via the Verrazano Bridge. So I didn't have the radio on, and for some reason, I had my kayak on the roof. It was a beautiful day, as everybody mentioned. And I just noticed to the left of my eye, as I'm on the bridge, this tremendous smoke condition coming out of the North Tower. With this, I turn on the radio and I hear that all New York City firefighters and police officers are to report to their respective firehouses and precincts, and all the bridges and tunnels leading into Manhattan are now closed. So I turn around, come back into Staten Island, drop my kayak on my lawn, and I get my fire gear, which I had to buy when I was a firefighter. I had a turnout coat, helmet, and boots. And so I drove to, my wife was teaching in a preschool, and I said, I've got to get back into Manhattan. So she said, well, I know you were an American soldier and you were a firefighter, and I understand you have to do this, but just know that I love you. Just contact me when you can. So I get on the Staten Island ferry, and this was only for police officers, firefighters, EMTs, doctors, nurses. And as we're in New York Harbor, I see the South Tower collapse. Now, we got into Manhattan, and I thought I saw bad things in Vietnam, but this was absolutely the hammers of hell. You couldn't see your hand in front of you for the dust and the smoke. There were people jumping onto this boat as it arrived. So I had made my way over to the World Trade Center. I couldn't recognize any streets. I just was walking through the smoke. And then the North Tower collapsed after that. So flash forward to the night. And I met a young firefighter that I knew, and he said, Cap, Ladder 11 is missing. That's where I had been the captain, Ladder 11. They're on 2nd Street between B and C. Well, I said, well, all right, Mike, well, give me the names. So he gave me the names of the firefighters, and I said, well, I don't know who this Michael Camarada is. I don't know who he is. He said, Cap, it's a very sad story. It was Michael's first day in the firehouse. It was his first alarm that he was responding to. It turned out to be his last alarm. Michael was the youngest firefighter killed on 9/11. He was 21 years old. Out of the 343 firefighters that were killed that day, he was the youngest. So this guy, the same firefighter, tells me, listen, Cap, our captain is on medical leave. I said, yeah, but Mike, I'm retired 4 years. And he said, well, but we're at war. And I said, you know what? You're right. We are at war. So I had made it over to the firehouse, and I stayed there for several weeks. And the fire department had disbanded the 3 platoon system, and the firefighters were working 24 hours on and 24 hours off. And then we got the word that everybody working in Ladder 11 that day were killed. Then all my friends in the World Trade Center who had been working, they were also killed. And so it was a tough, sad time. But I just want to say one thing. When the funeral started, and you have to remember the entire United States was grounded. There was nothing flying. But there were firefighters that drove from Chicago to help us. And there were 12 of them. They walked into the firehouse and they said, well, you guys go to sleep. We're here to fight fires for you. But then, told us to the chief. The chief says, listen, you guys got to go back and protect Chicago. I mean, supposing the Sears Tower gets hit with terrorism. And as all of us remember, nobody knew what was going to happen, especially the first 2 weeks after. We had no idea what was going to happen. We thought we were going to get hit again. But what bodes me very well is when they had the funerals for these firefighters, thousands of firefighters showed up to these funerals to give these guys a proper funeral. And they came from not just all over the United States, but from all over the world. And it was something to behold. It was something. So that's my 9/11 story.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you all for sharing your stories. So just pivoting to the immediate impact of 9/11 for everybody. And this is actually a 3-part question, a pretty long 3-part question. So for each of you on a personal level, how did 9/11 change you, your worldview, and how you navigated the world? And as with some of you, you lost, either loved ones or friends or coworkers in the midst of an international tragedy. How were you able to cope with that and still kind of focus on what you needed to do in your job? We'll start with Joan once again, and then we'll go in the same order with Guy, then Mark, then Andy.
Thanks, Kweku. I really want to underscore something that all of my colleagues have said here today. I think it was Mark who mentioned that, the day in all of its horror is, while it was big and it was absolutely horrible, very immediately after 9/11, what I began to see was the best of the human spirit. And actually, it started on the same day of 9/11. On one of my tours, I had a youngster ask me, well, where was God on 9/11? And my response to that child was, God was in the firefighters who went in, the police officers, the Port Authority police officers, the EMT workers, the thousands and thousands of people that came to the World Trade Center to help. Many of them didn't even have to be there, but wanted to be there. They wanted to show the world that we could recover. And not only in doing that did they show the world that we could recover, but they helped to recover the city, and they truly helped to recover the pride of a nation and of a people. And so I cannot underscore enough the lessons that I began to learn on the day of 9/11. For me personally, the first lesson was when my friend Andy said to me, you're not going to be able to get home, Joan. You have to come with me. And this was at a point where I didn't even know what happened to my husband. I didn't know if he was dead or alive. I couldn't see anything that was going on in Lower Manhattan. And as we all indicated, there were no services. I wasn't hearing from him. I had no idea what was going on with him. And 7 hours later, I did get a call. We reconnected with my husband in Jersey City. And Andy took us both in and said, I have a home. And I want you guys to stay with me until you can figure out, how you're going to restore your life. And she was unbelievable. My family was incredible. My husband stayed with my sister-in-law out in New Jersey, and we stayed with our in-laws, with our parents, and the people at our jobs were unbelievable. They were constantly there to help us. And then there were the total strangers. And that's what really impacted me the most. When you think about where you're going to get your help from, you think that, well, your family is going to be there for you. And they were. But you never really think about the total strangers. And we had been in my apartment cleaning up. And I think I didn't tell you this before, but my husband and I were displaced for 6 months. We were not able to move back to our original apartment. Our goal after 9/11 was to salvage as much as we could from that apartment and to leave, because the apartment was in such bad shape. It was going to require a great deal of work to get it back to, being inhabited. And so we were there cleaning up. And I remember getting a knock on my door. And there at my door was a group of women, Southern Baptists, who just showed up out of the dust and said to us, "How can we help? How can we help?" I remember them boxing some of my stuff that was in my kitchen. I remember them trying to, help us clean up. In some cases, they weren't even wearing masks and they didn't even care. They actually took us out and got us something to eat for lunch. And what I remember mostly were the embraces. I never saw any of them again, but I can honestly tell you, these are people that I will never, ever forget. And so how did 9/11 change me? Well, shortly after 9/11, I began to realize that there is no greater strength of support and love than that of the human spirit. And I always tell people on my tours that terrorism is bad. Obviously, look at what happened to us on 9/11. But it's the human spirit that brought us back. And terrorism can't ever fight the human spirit. The human spirit will always, always win. And that's the thing that really helped me get my footing back after 9/11. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to tell you about that. Guy?
Yeah. Andy spoke about the funerals. I worked for a private ambulance company. I didn't work for a municipal EMS system, so we didn't have dress uniforms. As I said, one of my coworkers, Joan M, her funeral was the first of all the first responder funerals. Like I said, she was 24-year-old, single mom, 8-year-old son. And I recall going to her funeral. And I dressed in the best uniform I could dress in, show respect to her and her family. And it was raining slightly on that day. And her little 8-year-old son had on a yellow rain slipper. And right before they lowered her coffin into the ground, there was a blast of the siren, and we all stood and saluted, and you could hear people sobbing, and you could see people crying. And at that moment, her son went over to her coffin and he hugged it for the last time. A little rain slipper. That image is seared into my mind forever. And I went to a bunch of funerals, not just EMS funerals, firefighter funerals. I went out and I bought a uniform. Because I wanted their families to know how much we respected their sacrifice. That they weren't alone in their grief. And that the people that they were calling heroes, well, they were our heroes. And so I went to many, many funerals. Of the 8 emergency medical services personnel who lost their lives that day, I knew 3 of them personally. One of them, Mario Santoro, I trained him when he was a brand new emergency medical technician in my volunteer ambulance corps. He had a 2-year-old son, a 5-year-old daughter, a 2-year-old daughter, a 5-month-old son. He had just gotten off work. He had worked a double shift. He lived in the downtown Manhattan area. He could see the towers burning from his place. He told his wife he had to go back. And she was like, but you just got home. He said, no, I can't stay here. And he went back. And he had done a couple of transports, he and his partner, and they were about to do a 3rd transport when the towers collapsed and they killed him. Another one of the EMTs I knew, David Mark Sullins, he worked at Cabrini Medical Center, which doesn't exist anymore, but he also worked a double. And he stayed on to work. They had done 2 transports, sent his partner out to get more equipment when the towers collapsed. And he was lost as well. The EMS personnel who were lost came from all parts of EMS. They were volunteer ambulance corps people. They were fire department EMS people. They were municipal, they were voluntary hospital people. And they were private ambulance people. Every aspect of EMS participated in the rescue, every aspect lost personnel in that day. But besides the funerals, how, as Joan said, people came together. All of us came together. And, we rushed down there. We wanted to be down there. In the aftermath, with me personally, I had to make a decision in my life. I made a decision to start doing emergency medical services full time because I never wanted to be in a position where I was leaving. I had to wait. I had to figure out a way to get there. I wanted to be able to go. In 2005, I was one of 65 volunteers from my ambulance company who went to Louisiana for Hurricane Katrina. And we were down there for a month. Interestingly, we were at one home, I think it was in Covington, and we were giving out water and MREs, military meals, and doing inoculations. And one of the residents there noticed my patch in New York State certified. And she said, "You from New York?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "You came all the way down here to help us?" I said, "Well, you guys came to New York to help us on 9/11. And she hugged me and she started crying. And then her husband hugged me and started crying. So then I started crying. But it's that idea that, the idea that we had that, we reciprocated. It was like we all saw each other as humans. We saw each other in need. We did what we needed to do to help other people out. And I think out of all the things that came out of this, that's the thing that impressed me the most. I mean, even while we were at Beth Israel Hospital waiting to come down, there was a young guy about 18, 19. He was an EMT in Texas. He said, "Listen, I'm here. I'm visiting from Texas, but can I come with you?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, come with us." I had chiropractic. He said, "Listen, I'm just a chiropractor. Maybe I can work on some of the firefighters. Maybe I can help them out while I'm down there." I mean, there were people just coming up to volunteer. And in the aftermath of that, they were regulating traffic past there. And my ambulance company was in Brooklyn, and I was a supervisor at Madison Square Garden for EMS. And I'd have to drive through the Battery Tunnel and pass the site. And every time me and my partners would drive through, as we passed the World Trade Center site, we'd always throw our lights on um, in remembrance. But there were people on the side of the road whenever they saw ambulances and fire trucks, and they would hold up signs thanking us. And that went on for a while, and it was like, even though that day I felt so helpless, the idea that people felt compelled to thank us for what we did or tried to do that day was something that was heartwarming for me. And as I said, I worked at Madison Square Garden, and I was there for the concert for New York.
Mm.
And, so I was there for that. And, when they started to recognize us. I mean, I was standing there in attention, and they started to put the cameras on all the first responders that were there, and how people reacted to us. It was just phenomenal. Also in the aftermath, Robert De Niro was part of the group of people who spearheaded the Tribeca Film Festival. And with my ambulance company, I was able to work the Trifecta Film Festival. So I was back down in the area again, and it was like just continually keeping me connected and showing how we were trying to revitalize and to re-energize and to live again. And I think that's the biggest example of what's happened in the immediate aftermath. Is we felt the intense tragedy, we felt the intense sense of loss, but we fought to get back to some sense of normalcy. And we fought to show that we can't be overcome like this. And we fought to show that we can still stand, and we can still build, and we can still live our lives and not live our lives in fear. And I think that's one of the important things about that.
Thank you, Guy. Mark?
Just, from a psychological note, just to put me in place on where I resided. Donna and I stayed here, and I use Donna as a reference point because, PTSD takes on a couple different forms. You either fight or you flight. You carry it. But there's a third aspect of it, that I've learned about. One is where you throw yourself into the moment. And what you're doing is the moment. I wasn't denying what was around, but it was in the moment. I had a business. I had employees. They had healthcare. They needed checks. They had to pay rent and mortgages. So immediately afterwards, everything was shut down. My office was in the red zone, meaning I could not get into it. I was just out of it. So I could not, I was not there. I was, I couldn't get in. Eventually, I was able to get across the fence into my office with the help of a couple of New York City officers, police department, who let me in, watch me. I filled up a red wagon, and this was like 10 days, 2 weeks later, we found a new office. In the short term, we were here. The building I lived in, which was 21 units, emptied out. Everybody was gone, except there must have been 3 or 4 of us who remained. One of my neighbors, I found out later, would get up at 2 a.m, and I told you there were those trucks that would come in at 2 a.m. and drop stuff off. They would go down and help unload the trucks. You would walk out your door. There was no food service down here. The grocery store was closed for some time. But you could walk down near the fence, near the area on Greenwich Street, and there were food trucks lined up. McDonald's, Burger King, Popeyes, I don't know who else was there. You just walk up, they'd give you food. You'd sit on these park benches with New York City Police Department, Secret Service, other people down there. We wouldn't really chat because we were all devastated. The recovery workers were particularly, blown away. You could see it in their faces. The Red Cross was walking around throughout the area talking to people. And I took an hour session with one because I had really bad survivor's guilt. It was, watching those who died, watching the jumpers. The local hotel around the corner, which was a single occupancy, was converting over from a hotel, from a place for the homeless where they were housed to becoming a hotel. They opened it up completely to the Red Cross workers. These were the small deeds, the small things, as Joan mentioned, that people were there. I was absolutely gobsmacked by, I could finally talk to my insurance company about my business, about whatever. They could not do enough. People were calling me from all over the country, seeing what they could do. It was a sense of community. That was immediately afterwards. And that helped me cope? Yes. But I think more importantly was that Donna and I were in this together. Donna had a reality of the moment. It was about, okay, we have to do this, we have to do that. And that kept me going, kept me focused on not giving up, which really helped. But it was everybody there. My employees, my clients, once I finally got back to work, they were helpful. They couldn't care. I'm not sure how we got any work done because none of us felt like doing much. But I think, on a broader dynamic, I think what I'm saying is our stories, our memories that you're hearing, our memories that we're sharing. And remember, we're all touching on our own personal parts, what we saw. And we're like putting this Legos together, this Legos of that day, this Legos of our lives. And we're building something. So what you're seeing is our memories, our stories are now being passed to you. And they're being passed to you for you to carry, for you to remember, for you to share. They become a narrative of what I think we're all saying. There's a humanity here. There was a humanity that I have never experienced before. And currently I'm a crisis counselor, dealing with, the crisis of mental health, in the pandemic. And I'm realizing how much support and caring and the memories and the stories we tell help each other. And I think that, to me, going forward is, yes, it was a terrorist attack. It was horrible. But the human spirit that was witnessed down here, the human spirit you're hearing firsthand by the four of us, the human spirit of the 9/11 Tribute Museum, are giving tours. That's what I believe is helping me cope. And I know it's long after, but it's always been inside me after that I have these memories. And it was 3 years before I got used to a plane flying over New York City, and I didn't flinch. Andy, I think you're next.
I am. Thank you. Firstly, Guy, I want to thank you, and I admire you for your courage. I mean, EMTs are unsung heroes. And on that terrible day, you took care of firefighters, police officers, civilians. You took care of a lot of people. And I admire you for your courage. Now, as far as crying, I give myself permission to cry all the time because I was an American soldier. I was in Vietnam. I was in the New York City Fire Department. And like I say, I give myself permission to cry because I'm allowed to cry. Now, I look at these magnificent young people that become firefighters, that are in our military. And, you know, it took a lot of courage to become a firefighter after 9/11, where 343 New York City firefighters were murdered, in addition to the 37 Port Authority police officers, 23 New York City police officers, 3 court officers, like your colleagues in EMS. Anybody who put on a uniform after 9/11, let me tell you, my hat is certainly off to them. I mean, they are such courageous people. You can imagine if, you know, you told your mother that you wanted to be a New York City firefighter after 9/11, what she thought of this. Or like my nephew did after 9/11, he joined the Army and he was sent to Afghanistan and Iraq. These young people today don't get enough credit for the things that they're doing. Unfortunately, the news media does not sing their praises at all. You know, like it's a different agenda today, but they're there, they step up, and I have nothing but admiration for them. And this is something that I notice. I pray for them every night because they certainly are very courageous men and women. And so, and then back on 9/11, we lost 48 rigs that day. These fire departments, what they did was it's traditional in the fire services to have a pumper to carry the casket. They came with their own pumpers. They came with their own bagpipers, which is also tradition in the fire service. And they gave these guys proper funeral. Like I say, they came from all over the United States and the world. I just couldn't believe it. They deferred getting new fire trucks, these various cities, and they deferred it to New York City. And like when you stepped up for another tragedy and people thank you, Guy, you know what? I try to volunteer when there's a disaster. I've done this a few times. And people are so grateful. I also go to Walter Reed once a year and look at these marvelous kids that have stepped up for us. And they're all broken to pieces. And I thank them from the bottom of my heart and the people of New York City and the people of the United States that they're really step up people. I mean, that's all I can say. So I'm so impressed by what's going on in the young people that are actually carrying the burden for the rest of us. So that's how I'll conclude.
Thank you, Andy. All righty, so pivoting here. So Mark, you actually kind of touched on it with mental health, but something that does not get talked about enough is post 9/11 illness. Right now, there have been more people who have died at this moment than died on the day of 9/11. And there are countless other people who are suffering from cancers, respiratory illnesses, you know, due to their service in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 and during the recovery. So, you know, really being able to, you know, talk about this and help people understand that, you know, just because 9/11 happened, you know, going on 20 years, you know, 9/11 for a lot of people is every single day, you know, not to mention
yes,
not to mention the family members who lost loved ones who have to live with that void. So really, it's important to continue to tell these stories so that, you know, people understand that this is an ongoing thing. There are people who are still battling to this very day. In addition to, you know, like as Mark mentioned, you know, people who have anxiety about, you know, planes flying overhead. There's a lot of PTSD, survivor's guilt. You know, I've had people who have been trying to volunteer at the Tribute Museum who, you know, are still working through their PTSD. You know, they may not have gotten, you know, proper help for it, but you can kind of recognize it right away. And, you know, it's really important to talk about this and encourage people to, you know, get the support that they need for, you know, for this, because, you know, some people just may not be able to recognize it. So for each of you, as each of you has a different connection to this, if you kind of want to speak about, you know, how this has affected you, whether it be mentally or physically or both, and how you've kind of coped and worked through it after all these years. So we'll start with Joan, then Guy, then Mark, then Andy. You're on mute, Joan.
Sorry about that. So after September 11th, my husband and I were displaced for 6 months. In January of 2002, we had gotten a call, and the call was along the lines of, will you be coming back to Gateway Plaza, which is the residential community that I live in? And the answer from my husband and I was immediately yes. It was actually never a decision for us. My husband and I knew that we had to come back. We wanted to come back. We absolutely loved our home here. We loved this community. We loved our neighbors. We loved the area. And so it was never even a decision that we had to labor over. We wanted to come back. And so in February of 2002, we did come back. We came back to a different apartment. My first apartment was, as I said, badly damaged, and it needed to be repaired. And so they gave us another apartment. Now, I will tell you that coming back really elicited a very interesting reaction from people that I knew. Many of people in my family, many people that I worked with, many of my friends did not want us to come back. The area had developed what I would call a stigma. First of all, a stigma because people felt that it wasn't safe. A number of us have indicated that, we didn't know what was going to happen next. We never, knew if something else was going to happen in the area. And let's face it, this is an area where a lot goes on here. You've got Wall Street, you've got, it's a very high profile area. And so a lot of people were telling me, Joan, why don't you just move? Why don't you just leave, go to a safer area? For us, there was no other choice. And I always tell people, I mentioned my tours, and I've done many of them. I always tell people on my tours, it scared me more not to come back than it scared me to come back. Because not to come back would have meant that we gave in. And that was not what my husband and I were about. I learned a lot about myself after 9/11. I learned a lot about my husband and I after 9/11. We were a lot stronger than we ever thought we were. And there was no way we were going to give in to terrorism. We were going to live our lives. And that's the message that I give on my tours. I would tell you, though, that I was scared. When we came back, we had fighter jets flying over our building often. I remember hearing the noise and being scared. It was actually a trigger because the day of 9/11, those planes and the noise that I heard from those engines, as Mark had indicated, that's a trigger for me. Planes in the sky are triggers for me. Severe, clear, blue sky days are triggers for me. And so I have to live with those new normals and those triggers, which are kind of cyclical. As we get closer to the annual 9/11 anniversary, and we start seeing more visuals on TV and we start hearing more things, those triggers all come back. And it's not only for me, it's for a lot of my colleagues. It's for pretty much anybody in the 9/11 community who had to adjust after 9/11. But I would say my new normal after 9/11 was that I was really concerned about air quality here. I used to walk around. It was hard to get in and out of this area. So a lot of what we did was on foot. And I used to see those machines that they had all over the neighborhood They weren't, I don't know if they were like Geiger counters, but they were taking readings from the air. And I have to tell you, that made me tense. It stressed me out to see that, because I knew that the air quality was not good. And until this day, I fear for our health. But even though I fear, I would have never done anything differently. I would have come back. And if it happened again, I would come back, because this is my life. This is where I was meant to be. And I wasn't, and still will not, let anyone tell me how to live my life. I love this community. I'm an advocate for this community and for everything that has happened here. I've lived through the rebuild. I'm proud of that. And I will do everything I can for the rest of my life to share the history here and to be an advocate, not only for the community, but for the people who helped bring it back after 9/11. Guy?
After 9/11, I don't think I dealt directly with a lot of the things that were going on. I worked a lot. I deliberately worked a lot. I worked the full-time job, the part-time job, and then when the part-time job became the full-time job, I worked overtime on that job. I worked as much as possible. In 2010, I have a picture of myself down right in front of the Chase Bank, diagonally across from Ground Zero. And there's a picture of me with a fellow EMS supervisor. His name was Wesley Watson. He is also a part-time EMS supervisor. His full-time job, he was a professional drummer. He played with the Duke Ellington Orchestra, Count Basie Orchestra. He played with Ashford and Simpson, and he played the White House 3 times with the Hampton Orchestra. He was known as Wally Gator Watson. And in September of 2010, he passed away. And I believe it was complications from his service down in Ground Zero. It wasn't long after that that I found that I had cancer, very rare cancer that's related to my service at 9/11. I've had 3 major surgeries since then. I had 2 of my heart valves replaced. I had part of my liver removed. I had 2.5 feet of my small intestine removed. I had my gallbladder removed. And then after being told I was cancer-free, I discovered I wasn't cancer-free. And now I just recently discovered that the 2 heart valves that were replaced have been damaged by the recurrence of the cancer. And I'm going to have them replaced again. So there's that realization. My boss, the person who was the president and CEO of my ambulance company at the time, he was with my coworker, Joan M, when the towers were collapsing, and they ran out of the building together, but they separated afterward. And while he survived that day, she did not. However, he later passed away too. I think it was September of 2011 from lung cancer related to his service on September 11th. It's 20 years later, and people are still dying from September 11th. As Quaker brought out, more people have passed away from illnesses related to September 11th that actually killed in that day. And there's at least 15,000 people who have been diagnosed thus far with illnesses like cancers and respiratory ailments related to September 11th. So here it is 20 years later, and there are still ill effects from it. One of the things that is troubling for me is on the days after that, we said, united we stand. And we said, never forget. And today, as I go through difficulty, because I had to move to take care of a relative, trying to reinstate all of my health through the World Trade Center Health Program, it's been a nightmare. People promising to call back and they haven't called back and things like that. It's been a nightmare. When I see how this country has grown at enmity with each other. Um, it's become so adversarial. It's like we seem to have forgotten the lessons that we learned on that day and the ensuing days, that we're all human. When we read the names every year, there are Muslims and Christians and Jews and atheists and people from India. People, so many countries lost people, so many different beliefs and backgrounds, lost people. They were all just human beings on that day. And we're still just human beings. And it seems like people are forgetting that humanity, and it's troubling to me. My daughter is full-time National Guard, and when she and her husband, who's now a law enforcement officer, were in the National Guard, they actually got deployed. And so the idea that the possibilities still exist, that in spite of all these things, there's still this much enmity in the world, can be troubling. I have friends. I've been in support groups for the 9/11 first responders. I have one who was a police officer. She worked on the pile for months, where they were sifting through the buckets looking for remains of, of those who lost their lives that day. And she did that for a long time. I remember her talking about being at a party and seeing a bucket being passed, the ice bucket being passed, and immediately having a feeling come over her because it put her in mind of what she had witnessed down there for those months and months. I've had friends and associates who haven't been down here, down to the area since that happened. They're so deeply affected by it. Some of them are still in emergency services, deeply affected by it. The scars of this event run really deeply. I would love that the ideas that we spoke about of unifying, of humanity, of love, of cooperation, I would love if those things continued as well. And I think it's important, it adds to our mental health and our mental well-being when we can find some type of relief. But when we continue to have this type of stress because of the conditions, because of the enmity that exists, because of our lack of cooperation with each other, it exacerbates those other feelings. A lot of us are going through the things that we have to go through every day anyway. Combine that with physical ailments, and multiply that by the fact that it's 20 years later. And then compile upon that the stresses of the world today, and it can be overwhelming for a lot of us. And so it's important for us to seek, and then coronavirus came along, and that exacerbated things because we had to isolate, and there was the fear involved with that. I mean, I actually recertified as an EMT because of coronavirus, and I ended up having to come down to help take care of family. But there was stresses involved with that. New York City MS normally does like 2,500 calls in a tour. They were doing over 4,000 calls. They were calling in for the first time since 9/11, mutual aid from other states and cities. And first responders and medical professionals were facing all kinds of stress because of that. I have people that survived 9/11 that did not survive the coronavirus. I have people that I worked with that ended up on ventilators because they were trying to help others and got afflicted with the coronavirus. So all these things kind of just add on top of things, and it can be very stressful. We try to find solace in each other. The people here, our families, our friends, you try to find the solace in it. And it's difficult when you can't go and you can't hug people and be with them that way because of the situation that's involved. But in spite of all of that, we're still here and we're still pushing on and we're still striving on. And it means that we can overcome this. The fact that we're still here, the fact that we're still striving indicates that we have the wherewithal to overcome this, to get back together, to be human again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Guy. Mark?
Joan and Guy and Andy so eloquently talked about this spirit. And I think, Andy, I didn't think about it. I knew it. I think you touching on the respect you have for all those coming in, how you see them, their braveness, their wanting to be part of it, to reach out. And I think that's part of, well, for me, that's part of it, because I sort of discovered that after 9/11, was my business, and, I was working, I needed to do that to keep going. And I had the triggers that Joan had. Those gosh darn airplanes. I'm in New York. I can't believe I'm saying gosh darn. There are a lot of other words I could use. Those planes, I won't say a trigger, but I looked up. I was cautious. People slowly drifted back in. The neighborhood, it got back to normal. But what happened, what is so striking over the time, the neighborhoods come back. And they're not the same people that were here. And it goes back to what Guy said about, we have each other. That's our connection. And there are not many of each other. We gather at the Tribute Museum. We're talking now. So I want to get back to that. And I want to put in perspective, post 9/11, post that year to the present. Donna died of 9/11 related illness. She was one of those. She was one of those who died after. And, to be honest, I had survivor's guilt about watching the jumpers. I still live with the survivor's guilt. Like Joan, we swore we were going to be here. A couple of my neighbors, in fact, one's a Brit and his wife, and another was a British woman who, remember World War II and Britain. They stayed. We all stayed. And, I don't know, maybe it shouldn't have been second guessing, but I'm not going to second guess because we were here. We were part of this. I walked the neighborhood. When the memorial opened up, and I forget what year, I think it was 2011. I think it was shortly after Donna died. I went down. And, I watched the construction. I'd walk by, you'd see the building going up, you'd take pictures of it. Once I got on the memorial that day, and I remember, and I saw the items, the archives, which are items. What you're seeing now with us, our people, are our stories, or our narratives. But seeing the archive pieces, and I guess I'll use the word trigger. I mean, I was overwhelmed. I'm still overwhelmed when I see that. When I go down to the memorial, going back to Guy's comment about how we have each other, I kind of get that feeling because they're there, they're with us. I feel I can walk up to somebody and say, I'm feeling like crap. I want to talk about my emotions and what I'm feeling. And I think it's much more prevalent now because, I'm old. But it's much more prevalent because I've been doing crisis counseling for a year, a little more than a year, and I've had, 1,200 conversations. a lot of them suicide related, sadness, depression. And I began to unload, to come into me what I'm feeling and seeing. I don't see the North Tower out of my window anymore. I no longer use One World Trade Center as a marker for my life, a marker for my community, because Donna's not here. That was ours. We held that closely. It was it was our personal pin drop in the map. But what I do see, what I do come to is that, and again, I'm using Guy because I think he captured it perfectly. We have each other. We connect with each other. We can talk. We understand each other. It's like survivors from all kinds of traumas get it and understand. But there's this empathy and compassion that opens up when others hear your story. I know as a crisis counselor, when I'm texting with somebody who's been through abuse, assault, bad parenting, whatever, I connect with them. And that's my way. I don't get to tell my story to them. I'm telling my story to you. We're telling our story to you. Our story to you is our ability to connect. And we want you to connect back with us by sharing our story, by letting people know you are our connection. You see Guy on the plaza, give him a hug. You see Andy, well, he's an ex-fireman. I don't think you run up and hug an ex-fireman like that. I think you have to ask permission first. Sorry, Andy. Joan, you hug her. She looks like a hugger.
That's a good point, actually. That's a very good point. Ask for permission first.
So, I think that's what my takeaway is. If I can tell my story, because I firmly believe that the puzzle pieces in my mind, in my heart, for what we've all been through, what I've been through, when they come out in this narrative, I can see it. It becomes 3D. It becomes a pathway forward. It becomes mile markers in my story. And what I hope it becomes is a mile marker for you. As Guy said, we only got us. Who the hell else do we have but us? Please carry us with you. Share us with others. You share you with us because you have a story of being there that day. Wherever you were, your story is as critical as any of ours. I'm sorry, I'm pontificating. Andy, bring us back to some solid ground.
Okay, very good. I'll try to do that. Actually, what's going on today is, the vast majority of the people that are going to see this were probably not even born on 9/11, a good percentage. Yeah, so this is part of American history. That's number one. I meant every word that I said about honoring the young people that are stepping up for their country, for their city, for their state. And that means for the rest of us. Having said this, Guy, you hit on this very well, actually. The news media, they foment a lot of this division that's going on now. And instead of concentrating on the fact that we are more united than they perceive us to be, I think we're much better people than we're portrayed. And I don't think people have this hate and animosity for each other. I just don't believe it. Like Mark said, I'm old now. I'm going to be 76 years old. And you know what? I can reflect on life without too much emotion. And I look at these young people and they're the future. I admire them. And I think we're going to be we're going to be all right with this whole thing. As far as mental health, you're absolutely correct. As a Vietnam veteran, I saw what it was with mental health. It was a long time in coming, but if you have a broken arm, go see Guy. If you have an emotional problem, go see Mark. And there are solutions for everything, and I think we're going to be all right. And I just want to conclude with that.
Thank you, Andy. And actually, that kind of plays into the last talking point, which was going to be about volunteerism and just any inspirational message. Just to briefly touch on it, because you've all been docents with Tribute for quite some time. I guess the question for each of you is, what motivated you, given the extreme nature of your experience? What really motivated you to become a volunteer at Tribute and share your story? And we can start with Joan, and same order as usual.
Yeah, and I would say that the help, the support, the love that I received from so many people after 9/11 is what really motivated me. And it took me a long time to actually find the 9/11 Tribute Museum, which at that point was called the 9/11 Tribute Center. And I remember seeing a newsprint on the 9/11 Tribute Center that, indicated if you have a story and if you're comfortable telling your story, to please contact us. And I remember contacting them and sitting with them and talking about it. And very soon thereafter, starting my tours where I was a support, telling my story. And it was a miracle for me. I found so much hope in the experience of being a part of the 9/11 Tribute Center. I found a family of people who had so many things not in common with me, but one thing that was very in common with me, and that was the 9/11 experience. And so as soon as I started volunteering with the Tribute Museum, I started feeling a sense of hope, a greater sense of hope, and a sense of purpose about not only telling my own story, but the story of what happened here in general on 9/11. I really got a sense of wanting to tell that story to people all over the world. And we're blessed at the Tribute Museum because we've seen over 4 million guests from all over the world, from countries all over the world. And I have to tell you, the feedback that we receive from those guests is that their life was changed. Listening to our stories, hearing what we went through, hearing what we saw, hearing the stories of others was something they didn't know. And that by coming to the 9/11 Tribute Museum and hearing our stories, it changed their lives. Here's the reality, and I want to end off with this call to action. We've all mentioned it, but it is a reality. The youngsters that were born after September 11th, they know nothing about 9/11. And we need them to get engaged, and we need them to carry this story forward. It's not only an American story, it's a world story. After September 11th, I had the opportunity to help people heal who had been impacted by other tragedies. I'll give you an example. I visited Japan after the earthquake, tsunami, and the nuclear meltdown of 2011. I didn't speak the Japanese language. I went over there not knowing if I was going to have any impact. And I will tell you that I still hear from people that I met in 2012 when I initially went and when I went back in 2015 who have actually said to me, Joan, your story gave me hope, and your story helped me begin to share my own story. And that has helped me heal. And when I hear those words, I feel blessed. I want to leave the young people with this one thing. Imagine if you're a family member, and after the World Trade Center, the tower was hit. You got a call from them, and they said, I'm making my way down. I love you. I don't know what's going to happen here today, but I absolutely love you, and I want you to know that. And they never heard from their loved one again, and they never saw them again. They vanished. Well, at the 9/11 Tribute Museum, those stories are very much real for many of our docents. And guess what? Those docents have chosen to take their pain and take their loss and their tragedy and turn it into something to help others in the world understand history and to help others in the world heal, whether it is through their own tragedy or just the emotion that they feel from 9/11. And I don't know about you, but if a family member who lost somebody on 9/11 can get up every day and tell their loved one's story, maybe tell a story about something that was funny about them, but tell the story so that you remember that person as you move forward, then the least I can do is go out there and tell my story. And I hope that you will grasp those stories and you will talk about them with others in your circle. Because if you do that, you help us to keep the spirit of 9/11 and all those who died on that day alive. And that is my number one objective. Thank you so much. Please visit us. We need you to come and hear the stories. We need you to carry our stories forward. And we love you. Thank you. Guy?
Yes, volunteerism has always been a part of my history, so it's not something new for me. I did volunteering since I was a child. When I first became an emergency medical technician, it was with the Volunteer Ambulance Corps. That said, there's something about volunteering at the 9/11 Tribute Museum that's special. Except for last year, in 2005, when I was in Louisiana for Hurricane Katrina, I had been at the 9/11 memorial every year. And I recall stopping off at what was then the 9/11 Tribute Center and being told about what it was about, and recognizing that there were stories that needed to be told. As I said, I'm an emergency medical technician, and we have spoken a lot about the sacrifice of police officers and firefighters. But I didn't hear a lot about emergency medical services personnel. And I just felt that there needed to be a perspective, a voice for them as well. So in addition to telling my personal story, I tell their stories as well, because all of the sacrifices that were made on that day by everyone is important, whether they were traffic agents or sanitation workers or construction workers, or whether they worked in the cafeteria or whatever, but every single life that was lost that day is valuable. So I give a different perspective, and I share my story and the story of those who were colleagues of mine, so that people can see that the youngest was 18 years old. You know, he wasn't even working he was a volunteer EMT, and he was working at a law office, and he happened to be a police plaza when the towers were hit. He hopped into a police car and came down, and there's video of him working down there. A fire department paramedic, Carlos Leo, his wife worked in the building, Tower One, and he was treating a person with tears in his eyes because he didn't believe his wife had survived, but she had made it out, but he didn't make it home. Those type of stories that people don't know about are important, you know, because every sacrifice that was made that day, whether voluntarily or by happenstance, was important. And so that's one of the reasons why I volunteer. I was in a support group for 9/11 first responders. And there was a gentleman there in my group who had not been down here. He worked in the building. He had not been down here since then. And I kept telling him, you know, whenever you're ready, come to the Tribute Museum. I'm there like every weekend. I'll be there on September 11th. Just come to the Tribute Museum. Whenever you're ready, I'm here. And after the ceremony, I came to the Tribute Museum like I generally did. And I saw him there. And he saw me. And we just ran up to each other and we embraced. And he cried. And he said, thank you. Because without you, I would never have come back down here. And then not too long after that, he got tickets for us to go up into One World Trade Center. He had never been. And for us to be able to share that together. And it all started because I volunteered down here to tell my story. And I gave him an outlet so that he could share that, you know, with someone who understood, you know. And as we start to age and, you know, our health starts to deteriorate, it's important that these stories continue to be told. It's important that we recognize, you know, the resilience and the resolve and the sense of purpose for people who left their jobs, their homes, wherever they were, to come here to help. Whether they were first responders, whether they were some of the 500,000 people who came down here to volunteer, you know, just giving out water or food or things like that. All of them facing certain health risks and inconveniencing themselves just to help other people. It's important those stories are told, because all too often, as I said earlier, we forget about the good in the human spirit. And it's a poignant reminder that we do have this within us to help each other, to reach out to each other, to be good to each other. It's also a reminder to us that things can change for us in the flick of an eye, in a second, right? When I was down here, I got a phone call from my best friend. And it was surprising to me because, you know, the cell phone service was intermittent at that time. And he said, you know, I had the two jobs. He said, I just want to make sure you're down there. And I said, why? He says, I'm thinking about all the people who went to work today to a job that they hated and died at a job that they hated. He said, I know if you were there and something happened to you, you were doing what you wanted to do. And that was an important thing for me. And it's when I talk to young people, I said, you know, people may try to direct you into certain professions or certain ways because they think you're going to make a lot of money, you'd be successful. But if it doesn't speak to you, if you have to wake up an hour early just to sit on the edge of the bed to convince yourself to go to work that day, what are you doing with your life? You know, I said, it's important for you to do something that calls to you. And if it's something that helps other people, even better. You know, I think that's a core thing. But the other thing I say, and I say this, and I'm closing here, and I say it when I close out my story when I'm at the Tribute Museum. How many people woke up that day and maybe had a little argument with someone they loved in the house? You know, somebody's in the bathroom too long, somebody drank all of the coffee, you know, why are you on my way? Get out my way, move out my way. You say a little something harsh. You probably don't really mean it. You say it in the front of the moment. You walk out the door and you close the door. And you say, you know what, I'll make it up to later on. But for some of these people, later on didn't come. And the last thing they said to someone they loved and cared about wasn't something loving and caring. So I say this as a reminder that whenever you're leaving someone that you love and you care about, whether you think it's going to be for 5 minutes or 5 hours or 5 days, make sure the very last thing you say to them is, I love you and I care about you. because you can never tell when that's going to be the last thing you say to someone, and what do you want that to be.
Thank you, God. Mark?
Volunteering. So I'm widowed, as you now know, and I have no family. I mean, we had no kids. You know, I have a brother and sister, and friends. But I think not shortly, before Donna died, I was a caregiver. Meaning and purpose started flitting away. And then I closed my business up so I could take care of Donna. I was doing some consulting work that ended up going away, after Donna passed. And I started volunteering at the hospice where Donna died. Then I, discovered the Trivia Museum, and something clicked. When I would sit in the Tribute Museum, and when we would have get-togethers, and Joan or Guy or Andy, I don't know if you've been in those. I have never experienced such energy of community, of true community, where we're all together and you can feel the energy. You can feel the fact we are all connected on a single, not a thread, not a synapse. We're connected on a memory, a big memory, a memory of the towers coming down, a memory of terrorism, a memory of spirit, a memory of fear. But we're all connected by these little memories. And we're passing these little memories to you. And what happens with little memories, I really believe that memories that come out and they take on a life and they bump into other memories. My memory is now tied with, Joan's memory is now tied with Andy's memory, what he sees. I'm seeing things differently. My story became bigger. I haven't taken Andy or Guy's story or Joan's story. I've integrated it into mine. And that's part of volunteering. Part of when you're doing it from the heart and you're giving. And as I said, I became a crisis counselor. And I see that more. I see this connection to others. Because it's not a connection at an office. It's not a connection at a job. It's not a connection, working at Amazon. It's not any of those things. When you volunteer, it's a connection to something you're doing. You're here. You're actively participating with us. You're listening. Hopefully some of you are taking notes, or some of you have stopped it to cry along with us. Maybe you've even stopped to think, well, what was I thinking at the time if I was born then? Or as Andy said, if I wasn't born, what did my parents tell me about that day? So the Trivia Museum, one of the things that happens is when you go out on a tour and you give a tour and you open up, you do this thing from the heart, you take your memories and you lay them out. You put them on a table. They connect with it and they give you a hug and they carry it with them. And that's what I hope we're doing from this, distance. Thank you, coronavirus and pandemic. Hopefully you will take them and you will make bigger memories from our memories. You will not take our memories and tell small stories, but you will take our collective memory of all these little tiny pieces, all these little Legos of memories, all these little puzzle pieces of our emotions and feelings, and put them together in this puzzle. Maybe it's a quilt that you create, that you wrap around yourself and carry and show other people. I mean, I think that's what volunteering did, and that's part of what the Trivia Museum brought out when I saw it. I think it's part of our future to carry memories forward. I mean, to make a silly analogy, these are cave drawings on a wall. Look at them. Figure out what they mean and take them with you. I really can't thank Joan and Guy and Andy enough. They have opened my mind up so much. They have added to my, quilt of 9/11, and they've added to my humanity. Thank you, and thank you all for listening. Please do visit us.
All right, Andy?
Yes, well, the big thing with why I do this is so it's the memory of the people that I knew. They should never be forgotten because their lives were snuffed out. And the main reason I do it, and the main reason I go down to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial every Veterans Day, is for the same reason. These people have sacrificed their lives. Nobody went to work that morning thinking that they were going to die. And Guy, you said this, you hit the nail on the head. When you walk away from people that you love, don't walk away angry. Don't say something that you're going to be regretting and thinking that you have time to make it up, because you don't. So in that spirit, just remembering all these people that I knew personally, wonderful people. Their lives were taken from us very, very early. And hopefully there is justice, not in this world, but, like if you believe in a life hereafter, that's where we're going to get justice. And the thing is, we have to perpetrate this. In other words, we have to carry this on so these people are never forgotten. So having said this, I thank everyone who's listening, hearing our stories, and God bless you all.
Alrighty. Well, thank you all so much for sharing your stories, your thoughts, your feelings, your messages of inspiration. It's just being able to share this time with you is always special. And I just appreciate you taking the time out to do this. I also want to thank you all for watching. As everybody has said, really you listening to these stories and carrying these stories and sharing these stories is what is the reason we do this, to create this new consciousness within you and to really keep the memory of 9/11 alive and really give you a deeper understanding of, what the 9/11 community stands for. So thank you very, very much for watching. As Joan said, please come visit us. We are located in Lower Manhattan, about 2 blocks south of the 9/11 Memorial Plaza. We are a separate museum from the 9/11 Museum, as it's commonly called, even though we are the original. When you come, you get a museum full of art.
Gee.
True.
I had to do it. Sorry. Yeah, like facts. But yeah, you get artifacts, but most importantly, you get to meet our amazing volunteers who all have personal stories to share. And now that we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel with this pandemic, we really encourage you, once you are comfortable doing so, to come to New York and visit us down at the Tribute Museum. It means a lot to our community, and it means a lot to just our future, because we need to remember this for generations to come. And it starts with you coming, hearing these stories, and then passing those stories on. So once again, thank you all for participating. Thank you all for watching. That's going to wrap up our program. If you have any questions for any of our docents who have participated in this program, feel free to add them to the comment section, and we'll get those questions answered for you as well. So thank you all. Take care, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next program.